Eli Marcus is the executive director of Davler Media Group, publishers of New York City's largest circulation visitor magazine, City Guide. He spent 5 decades working with businesses in the hospitality industry. He is the host of the Motivation Show podcast. He interviews the world's best motivational speakers, New York Times bestselling authors, alternative health experts, mega successful entrepreneurs, celebrities, and more. As the former CEO of the Seminar Center, the premier seminar company in the United States, he hosted a who's who of celebs, New York Times bestselling authors, and experts in all fields. As a motivational speaker, Eli has spoken to tens of thousands of people on everything from a dozen essential secrets for massive success to how to be the number one salesperson in your industry. He has likely sold more advertising at a local level than anyone in the world and has sold thousands of memberships to different organizations, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, C-Suite Network, and the Seminar Center. Eli's database of tens of thousands of personal contacts in New York City alone has earned him the affectionate and unofficial moniker as the mayor of Times Square. Now let's join Eli Marcus. Welcome to the Water Cooler Hangout Podcast. I'm your host, Bob Poole. For over 45 years, I've been helping sales and marketing leaders and entrepreneurs grow and prosper by creating extraordinary experiences for their customers. Here at the Water Cooler Hangout, we chat with influential and successful guests who share their real-life stories about their careers and companies. Their successes, failures, and stories will resonate with you and leave you wanting to hear more. We'll learn how all of us are connected and how we share the same kind of challenges, fears, wants, needs, and dreams. My sincerest desire is that you hear something today that helps you create the job, the business, and the life you want and deserve. So welcome, Eli, to the Water Cooler Hangout.
Thanks, Bob. I'm looking forward to chatting about selling.
Yeah, let's do that. So we were just talking off camera here. You just said something about 30,000 cold calls. What's that about?
Well, I was a hungry kid. I wanted to succeed badly. And I wasn't the smartest guy in the room, maybe the best looking guy in the room. I didn't have all the natural abilities. What I did have is I had perseverance and I understood the law of numbers. It's a numbers game. And the more people that you called on, the more you're going to sell. It's just the percentage game. And I played that percentage game basically better than anybody else in my company.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing to talk about the numbers part of that. I was just talking to someone about it the other day. In fact, my sales training that I got, well, it was first baptism of fire with my own business. But, I found out very quickly, I was a professional photographer, and I found out I had to sell in order to survive. I thought, well, if I just do great photography, people, beat the path to my door and all that. So no, it didn't work that way. So I learned to sell. And then a few years later, when I had sold my studio, I got a job working for the first time. I thought, well, I'll work for someone and see what that's like. So I joined 3M Company as a salesperson, selling copiers. And this was in the 70s when 3M was selling coated paper copiers against Xerox that had plain paper copiers. So it was a tough sell to a degree, with a large degree. But what I found was, they said, well, listen, if you make X amount of cold calls a day, say you make 30 cold calls a day, knock on 30 doors, one person will probably talk to you. And for every one person that talks to you, when you talk to about 10 at least, maybe you'll close, 1 or 2 of those. And so you work the numbers backwards, just like you just said. You started the number of times you talk to someone and you work from there. And it worked. It worked for me.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is the more people you call on, the more education you get, because the more you learn what doesn't work. Right. And then you learn what does work and you can tweak and adapt. And so the only way is really putting your feet to the fire, getting out there and learning the hard way, because there's no better sales training, in my opinion, than actually just going out there and doing it. Now, of course, it is nice to have a shortcut in finding out things from a professional like yourself who can guide people and maybe help them. make maybe 10,000 less
Yeah.
cold calls
Yeah.
by adapting certain methodologies.
Yeah, I've never even tried to think how many cold calls I've probably made in my life, but it's a lot. So, selling copiers, and this was in Pittsburgh. It wasn't New York City, but I had a friend who decided that he wanted to go to New York City and sell copiers there. He asked for a transfer to New York, and his whole thinking was, he was from a little town, Altoona, Pennsylvania. His whole thinking was, if I can sell copiers in Manhattan, I can sell them anywhere. So,
yeah, right.
And I can sell anything. And he did. He went there. And again, it was a baptism of fire for him, having to try to haul copiers through Manhattan and demonstrate these things. But he ended up being one of the best salespeople for 3M and went on and had a career in management.
Yeah, you got to be good if you're selling in Manhattan, because there is a plethora of salespeople out there knocking on the same door. Out in Pittsburgh or other places, I doubt if there's as many salespeople. So you got to be even better when you're in Manhattan. You got to get that precious time that that everybody wants from their prospect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I'll tell you a story though. In Pittsburgh, in fact, I almost quit at one point, because I would go into, a high-rise office building, and it might have, 15, 20 stories or something, or as many as 50 or 60 there. And, I'd go to the top and work my way down, knocking on doors. So the one day I walked into an office and I just had a briefcase with me. That was it. And the receptionist looked up and said, "We don't need a copier." And I turned around like, what are you how do you know I'm selling copiers? And she said, "Because you look like you're selling copiers, and we just had like 5 guys in here in the last week, so it's like you all look alike." So I was like, oh, this is terrible. I've got to do something different. So I did.
Yeah, I love when they tell you that I've seen 1,000 people just like you, which it doesn't make you feel like you're that unique, But I think often salespeople just get lumped in to this very assumptive world of, oh, you're all alike. But I think we're all different. We all have different ways of handling ourselves. But sometimes, even when I'm not selling, I've had people say, "Oh, what are you selling?" They're so used to salespeople that they're almost sometimes telling you, even when you're not selling, "Oh, you must be selling something." That's how many salespeople are out there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, that's the old, if you ask 100 people what's their opinion of salespeople, you'll get a lot of negative feedback. So it's been my mission in my life to change that.
Yeah, well, 2 things you don't want to tell somebody in a party. One is you're a used car salesman, and the other one is you're an insurance salesman. Sure. And not like selling anything else, you're going to be even that much more popular.
Exactly. And you have the distinction of being probably the world's greatest advertising salesperson, from what I read.
Well, that's in my niche, which is really on a retail local level rather than a national level. So yeah, I've, being in New York City and having done this for 38 years, I've likely would get a Guinness World Record, I think, in selling advertising for sure, because I've sold it, often $5,000, $10,000 at a time, and sold over $100 million worth of advertising, which is a whole lot. And because I don't know anybody else who's really kind of even like 25% of what I've done. But, I'm not impressed with myself. It's just really, again, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, the handsomest guy in the room. I've just figured out that you just got to work hard in everybody. And that came, Bob, from me in grade school, getting a report card and only ever failing one subject. And it wasn't even a subject. It was really just something that was on the report card. It's called initiative, which I didn't even know how to pronounce at the time. I had to ask people what does that even mean? I had to look it up in the Funk and Wagnalls dictionary. And that's when I learned that manna isn't dropping down to heaven in a salesperson's lap. The last time manna dropped down from heaven was thousands of years ago in the Bible. So if you want to make something happen, you better not wait for it to happen. You better go out and get it. And so that's, back then it was the cold call, because we didn't have Zoom and all the things that we can use today. Back then it was face to face, and you got to get in front of people. And if you're going to just call people all day long, you're going to get tons of rejection. You might be lucky to get in front of one person. If you cold call, I've gotten in front of sometimes 27 people. That was my record, 27 people in one day.
27. Okay. And that was in New York.
Yeah. Like I said, it's the mean streets of New York City, I call it, because these people, they know, they can smell a salesperson from a mile away. And so you better have something really good to get yourself in that door.
Yeah, you mentioned Zoom and other technologies. You think about back when you and I first started selling, how difficult it was to find people. Even you had the maybe you had D&B cards that you could use. Sometimes you had to go to the library or the telephone book. I mean, it was the yellow pages, right? Just tracking down people today. You can get on the computer and find anyone.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the ability to literally cold call and understand the art of how to get in front of somebody and get them to actually see you on no notice, I mean, you're just going to make a lot more connection. That's for sure. Depends on what you're selling. Of course, some things that you're selling are just not conducive to just walking in, on somebody. But I've walked in on famous people who own businesses. I walked in on the lieutenant governor of New York City. Didn't even know it at the time that he was a lieutenant governor. I walked in on a 1969 New York Jet world champion, Super Bowl champion.
Yeah.
So you never know whose door you're knocking on.
Yeah. No. And I'll tell you another quick story. You're the world's greatest advertising salesperson. I was privileged also to know the world's greatest life insurance salesperson, a guy by the name of Ben Feldman, who is from my hometown in East Liverpool, Ohio, a little tiny town. And he sold more life insurance out of that little town, that office, than anyone in the world. He's passed away now, but he has quite a legacy. And he was a guy that was afraid to even be in public. He wouldn't even speak in public. Years later, they had to put a curtain up. He'd go behind a curtain and speak at conventions and stuff. And he was a reclusive kind of guy. And yet here he went out, and his thing was you just make one more call. And he wouldn't go home, he said, until he sold something every day. That was his way of doing things. And he said, this is kind of the same thing. He says, I'm not the smartest and I'm not the best looking, but he says, every day I made sure I sold something.
Yeah, sometimes having limitations is your best friend because it makes you hungrier, and you go out there and you fight harder to adapt and figure out the system. So, with me, I just read every book I possibly can, like Joe Girard's book. He's the greatest car salesman ever. So I learned from people who are great in other industries and then adopted their techniques, utilized mine. So basically, I was an amalgam of all the best salespeople on the planet. Tom, I went to the Javits Center, was trained by Tom Hopkins,
Sure.
who I consider the greatest sales trainer maybe in history, and Steve Schiffman and the Sandler Sales Institute. And I learned from everybody, including you, Bob. I want to learn what you have. And then I basically add my own in there and become pretty unstoppable when you can add Bob Poole, Steven Schiffman, Tom Hopkins, and Brian Tracy, and all the greats into the mix.
Yeah, well, you flatter me, but thank you very much. Yeah, those guys, I've met all those guys over the years, which has been great, and I've learned from them. I kind of figured out my own system back in the 3M days, but when I finally got to the point where I was hitting the speaking circuit and doing some of that, so I met, all the great sales trainers, and I sat and listened, and from them I learned a whole lot more. Which is why I came up with the whole idea of listening first and selling later, which was the only way you could sell copiers as far as I was concerned. If you went in there and started talking, you were going to get thrown out. So I learned to ask questions, and, I'd ask questions that had nothing to do with copiers. I just wanted to know how I could help them, how I could make their lives better.
Yeah, and you know better than anybody else that when we use the word selling, it's often misunderstood because that connotes the idea that you're actually pushing something on somebody as opposed to somebody buying. And as you and I both know, people don't like to be pushed or don't like to be sold. They like to buy. So it's a subtle difference. And you have to develop the relationship and the trust and the belief. And so that's really more my modus operandi is I'm not really there looking to close people hard, which might be even contrary to some of the trainers. I'm there to develop a relationship so that it kind of almost closes itself in many cases. People just like and trust me. And if you can get people to like and trust you, they're going to buy from you a lot easier.
Yep, you and I are on the same page. That's exactly how, I think you had to do it. And I hope people are doing that today. And I hope that's the message that they're getting from everyone. So, what successful salespeople, in your opinion, besides working hard, what else do they do? What separates the greats from the average?
Collaboration. I think when you collaborate with other people and inspire them and motivate them enough to send you referrals and leads, that's Joe Girard made a cottage living because what he was able to do is everybody that bought a car, he would get back to them in what's called an itch cycle. In other words, he's figured out that every 2 years or so, people are in the market for a new car. So he didn't wait to 2 years later. He just every, period of time, he would reach out to them. So for instance, every time they had a birthday, he made a note of that and he reached out to them, gave them a personal phone call. And how many people do that have sold you something? Most people that sell me something, I never hear from them again. They don't ask me, hey, Eli, how is the product you just bought? I just renovated my kitchen. I assure you, I don't think I'll hear from any of the people that sold me any of the appliances again. They just take you for granted. Joe Girard did the opposite. He was always in touch with people. And so when they had that itch cycle, when they were ready to buy the new car, guess whose name popped up in their head? Good old Joe Girard, the guy that followed up and cared.
Yep, absolutely. I am still amazed at the number of salespeople that don't follow up with some kind of a thank you and staying in touch over the years. It's crazy, and yet they still do it. What you just said, in fact, I bought a car a couple of years ago. I heard it from the salesperson because I sent him a book, and he thanked me for the book. But, I've never heard from him since. There is my wife's car. They would love to have it back. It's a low mileage car that everyone wants to have right now. And so the only time I ever hear from that dealership is when they try to buy the car back, which we're not interested in selling to them. But they never send out the kind of thank yous or follow-ups or birthdays or anything like that. And I'm still a big believer personally in sending handwritten notes.
Yep, I agree. It's flabbergasting because when I bought my car, I never heard from them either. But all it would take is a phone call and say, hey, Eli, how's your car running? Is it running up to your expectations? Just that one little phone call. The next time I'm in the market for a car, I'm like, wow, this is a dealership that cares. I mean, what does it really take? So it's amazing to me that they have all these protocols and all these training systems into place, yet the most basic thing, which is just a follow-up phone call, is something that just they don't do.
Yeah, I don't understand that. And yet you and I have been telling him this for years. So, I guess we'll keep telling him and see what happens.
Well, that gives us an advantage, I suppose, because if 80% of the people don't do the small stuff, and we do, puts us in a better position. And that's when people always ask me, what makes you so special? Why did you sell so much advertising? And a lot of it just has to do with the fact that the other guys are just not doing the small stuff. They're not sending the thank you card. They're not following up. They're more interested in their commission. And I can smell that a mile away. When somebody's more interested in their commission than servicing me, that's an issue. So, of course, we're all interested in the commission, but it doesn't mean that has to be your lead. It doesn't mean that's something that somebody should be smelling out. Before you even think of your commission, you have to first think, what can I do to provide value and basically over deliver? You've heard of that, under promise, over deliver. And so when that's your modus operandi, you're going to get a lot more people in your corner.
Yeah, focusing on value is the key. I tell everyone that's the number one focus. Have that focus and learn how to ask the right questions. You have to know what questions to ask, and you're, 80, 90% there, because people will like and trust you then if you start, asking the correct questions. I love it when someone says to me, I ask a question and they say, I don't know the answer to that. And I've never even thought of the question before, but that's a great question, in fact, and I need the answer. So that's sort of like, okay, good. We're on the right path.
Yeah, questions are really the basis for most sales. If you are assuming what somebody needs, well, we both know how that's going to end up. So how do you know what the other person's thinking unless you ask them? And it's amazing how many people are selling to me that don't ask me questions. They're just assuming. And that doesn't usually go too well, because I want a person to take interest in me enough to ask me the right questions. If somebody's asking me questions, I know they've done a little bit of homework. I know they're taking a personal interest, and it's just going to have a much better result.
Yeah, I had a situation last week where a friend of mine said, here's a company, they're a Canadian company, that they can help you with something you want to buy a service. So I said, great. So I sent him an email. I looked to see if I could call him. I had no phone number, of course. So I sent him an email and I said, I have a couple questions about your service, but I'm ready to buy today, right now. And I said that in the email. So please, would someone get hold of me? The whole day went by. Never heard from anyone. So finally,
remarkable.
Yeah, it happens. So finally, I went on their website again, and an AI robot pops up and says, "Can I help you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, here. I sent a message today to your company and said I want to buy it. I'd like to do it right now, this minute. If you want to have someone get hold of me." So someone got back and said, "Well, we can set up a call tomorrow." And I'm like shaking my head, just like, seriously. So finally, some guy did call it. Well, it was the next day. But I said, "Listen, I said, I don't even have any questions anymore. I said, I had a couple, but I don't have them anymore. And we went on from there. But it was, again, this was a salesperson. I'm like, yeah, well, I just shake my head. It's like someone calls and says, I want to give you money. How often does that happen?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's gold. If you think about it, when somebody has already bought from you, that is by far your best customer, because you and I both know it takes a lot more effort to get somebody who's never bought from you than somebody already has. So the people who've already bought from you to me, they're the platinum standard. And those are the people that you need to put on a pedestal and take more time and effort with, and make sure that you do all the right things. So, yeah, I mean, why start the whole process over again when you already got the platinum in your backyard?
Yep, absolutely. I agree. So you do a lot of work in speaking and motivation these days, it looks like.
Yeah, so that is my passion. I love to see people improve their lives. And I think a lot of people, if not majority of people, have something that they have just never addressed. For instance, fear. People don't often understand that they have fear. They do have the fear. They just don't address it. But often a lot of that is subconscious, and that fear is stopping them from building a business, or it's stopping them from getting on a stage and, getting more attention. So it's important for people to listen to other people who have overcome, and I've overcome, because I used to be a very shy guy who didn't want to ever get on a stage. The last thing in the world probably people would have voted for me would be to go into sales or to be a speaker. But in order to progress in life, you kind of have to do the things that make you feel uncomfortable. You got to just put your head in the lion's mouth. That's the way to do it. And you'll find out that, it's not as bad as you thought it was. But until you do it, you don't know that it's not as bad. So, yeah, I had a fumble, and it's okay to fumble. It's okay to fall down. That's the whole idea. Muhammad Ali said it best. It's not how many times you get knocked down to the canvas. It's how many times you get up. So, yeah, so I'm on the public speaking circuit, and I want to see people change from the level of, most people are just frustrated. The world is changing at a rapid pace, and most people just haven't achieved all the things that they want to. And so my job is to inspire, motivate, and give them better systems to do so.
Yeah, that's great. So with COVID, how have you been affected with speaking?
Like anything else, you take something and you make it into lemonade. So make those lemons into lemonade. So the things that I can do, which is get on a stage, you can build towards the future and actually create even more business, because then now you have all the virtual opportunities that didn't exist before. So you can get far more people, because before people had to often fly in to see you. Otherwise, you're just getting the locals. Now you can get people from any country in the world that can come in and listen to you speak. So you flip it over and you just turn it into an advantage. You learn new systems and new techniques and new things that you wouldn't have dreamed of doing, because now you're forced to be innovative. So sometimes those things are necessary, even though at the time you think it's the worst thing in the world. Of course, I don't wish COVID on any of us. I wouldn't have wanted that to happen. But now that it did happen, you have to figure out a way. How do I turn that into an advantage?
Yeah. And a lot of speakers I've noticed, they're doing the online thing. I have a friend who started a company. Well, he's had a company for a long time, but he kind of did a segment where he is helping people take their businesses, especially people that were consultants and speakers, and get them online. He saw the opportunity there, because like you just said, we had to learn all kinds of new things. Even I did, with how do you do green screen captures? How do you do screen on, presentations? How do you do all that technology stuff if you're not really familiar with the technology? So he's doing a nice job teaching people how to do that and getting them up and live, out there.
Yeah, I mean, you have to always be learning. And that's why I put together my podcast, because I'm trying to help people to learn. It doesn't make a difference if you went to Harvard, because Harvard doesn't teach you a lot of the things that you're going to learn on my podcast or even through our chat. You're just never going to learn that. I just interviewed Sharon Lechter, who wrote a book that I think sold maybe 30 million copies, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yeah,
she was the co-author with Robert Kiyosaki. So she wrote a new book called Exit Rich. And she talks about the fact that you don't wait until you're ready to sell to actually create a strategy to sell. You actually have an exit strategy the day you go in business. So you kind of know where you're heading. You got to have that entire plan in place, because by the time you get sick or something happens or COVID hits you, your business is not going to be valued as well. So you got to have the foresight, know when to get out, not just to be stuck in a business forever. And if you really enjoy it and you want to stay in it, that's fine. But I think it's important at some point, most businesses cash out and live your ultimate life.
Yeah. So the podcast is called The Motivation Show?
Yeah, the motivation show where I interview people who are, again, a lot smarter than me. Some of my childhood heroes, who wrote books like Dennis Waitley, who wrote The Psychology of Winning. He just actually came out with the sequel, The New Psychology of Winning. And that book helped to change my world around and made me understand the art of winning and what that really meant. I interviewed Scott Hamilton, the 1984 Olympic gold medalist in skating, and he has a book also about winning. And basically, he talks about if you're the third place or the second place finisher, you're not going to have the same platform as the guy who won. The guy who won is going to get all these endorsements, but more importantly, you're going to be able to speak to 1 million people who are going to listen to you because you won. Because a lot of people are going to follow you. They follow the winner. And so now you got a new platform. So that's why winning is so important.
How do you get by, maybe you've asked this of them, imposter syndrome, where you just don't think you're good enough. You've reached a point and you may have even had some success, you've done some things, but one day, you look in the mirror or you're on stage and you look out and you say, I really don't deserve this. I shouldn't be here.
Well, first of all, if you have enabled yourself to get on a stage, you do belong there. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on the stage. Imposter syndrome is just your mind giving you false evidence. It's kind of like, fear. They say false evidence appearing real, the acronym. Mm-hmm. Same thing, with imposter syndrome. When you were younger, somebody told you were not good looking, or they made fun of you because that's what kids do to each other. And some people have that in their heads for the rest of their life. They're still thinking they're this fat young kid that couldn't amount to anything, but you're not that kid any longer. And even back then, you weren't even what somebody told you were. It's just what somebody labeled you because they were mean. Doesn't mean that that's the reality. So you get to decide whether you belong on there or not. So if you decide that you're an imposter, guess what? You are an imposter. If you decide that you're legitimate, guess what? You are legitimate, because what makes somebody who appoints somebody as an expert? You know the answer, Bob? You appoint yourself as the expert. No one ever comes to you and says, hey, you're now ordained the expert. We're going to give you a certificate in being an expert. You decide to be an expert. We're all, in a sense, you can say that we're all an imposter at some point because we're all starting someplace, but we're not really a true imposter. We're just more of a rookie. I'd rather use the word rookie.
Good. Very good. Yeah, I've been trying to help some people lately who have suffered from that. And I asked someone the other day too what they do about it, and that you had the same ideas there. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and if you think you're an imposter, then you just got to go out and learn more, and read more books, listen to more podcasts, hire a professional like a Bob Poole to teach you. If that's your prevalent thought, then I think what it is your subconscious is telling you that you're not as prepared as maybe you can be.
Yeah.
So by reading more books and listening to more podcasts and doing these other things, you will be able to get on that stage with more confidence and not think so much that you're an imposter.
Yeah. I was speaking for a long time, probably years, doing seminars and workshops in sales. And then I joined National Speakers Association, and I went to one of their national conventions, the first one I went to, and I was sitting there next to Zig Ziglar and I'm watching him on stage then, and I'm watching Brian Tracy and all these people you mentioned earlier. A lot of them were there speaking. I'm like, what the heck am I doing here? I had that moment myself where I was saying, what am I doing here? Look at these people.
Well, it's natural because these are legends, and, of course, if you play basketball and all you're thinking of is I have to live up to Michael Jordan level, then that's never going to happen. So, that doesn't make you an imposter. That just because you're not the GOAT, the greatest of all time, doesn't mean that you don't belong there. And everybody's got something to offer. So somebody may pick up more tips from you than they might even pick up from Zig Ziglar. As brilliant as Zig Ziglar is, and as much as I was a fan of his, but doesn't mean that you don't have something that Zig didn't cover.
Yeah, and that's true. I was did a seminar one time, and the guy came up to me afterwards, and he said, I went through a Tom Hopkins course, he said, just a couple months ago. And he said, I learned more in the last 2 days here than I did in that whole course. And I'm like, wow, thank you very much. That was an honor. And that was back in the 80s. So good stuff. So what's next for you?
Well, what's next for me is I want to get on as many speaking stages as possible and share my message so that I can empower other people to uplift themselves and hopefully eliminate a lot of the lack thoughts. Norman Vincent Peale always said that if you think lack, you get lack. And so he wrote The Power of Positive Thinking. And it's not just having hokey positive thinking that's going to get you where you are, but you do have to change your mindset. You do have to change the words that you use in your subconscious and use externally. So, if you're going to, again, use words like imposter, that's where you're going to kind of stay. So you have to empower yourself. And the best way to do that, again, is by continuous learning. If you're in front of Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, and Jim Rohn and Tony Robbins and all these other people, you can't help but get yourself out of imposter thinking, because now you've learned from the best. And plus, you're adding your own element of expertise in. It makes you kind of unstoppable. It doesn't make you an imposter. It makes you the exact opposite. I look at myself as unstoppable because I can give you in a summary what the greatest trainers in the world have trained, and then add my own in. So I consider myself an expert because I've been able to learn from everybody else. Tony Robbins talks about modeling. Quickest way to get someplace is to model after what somebody's already done. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel every day. Haven't reinvented the wheel. I've learned things that no one else maybe has learned, but most of it is started by simply mimicking and modeling after Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, and Dennis Whaley, and everybody else that came before me.
So with your motivation speeches, and how are you teaching people? How are you helping them get to where they want to be?
Well, the number one thing is to work on people's mindset. If you have the proper mindset, you can get anywhere in life. If you still have that, again, imposter syndrome, fear of failure, fear of success, why me? Who am I to be at this level? Self-doubt, people analysis paralysis. If you have all those things still in your head, you're just not going to get to the promised land. So, one of the things you learn is just start someplace. And that's a message that I try to put out, because people are in that analysis paralysis. So they just never start. They never get. And we're never going to figure everything out up front. So the idea is to just start someplace, let the world come to your rescue. And they will. If you create enough alliances and you try hard enough, things just come to you that you can't pre-plan for. None of us can pre-plan for everything. We can write the business plan, we can write the exit strategy, but a lot of the stuff in between just comes to you because you've done all the right things along the way.
Yeah, just go do it. Just go do something.
Just do it. Just get out there and start, and it'll evolve.
Yeah, I like to tell people when they're stuck like that, just take action, any action, even if it's not the right action, go do something, please.
Yeah, and a friend of mine who's mega successful, he put it, I think, in a very good way. He said that, I'm not caught up in the results. And I said, what do you mean you're not caught up in the results? He says, I could fail and I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is I didn't try, I didn't start, and I didn't put my best effort in. He says, the rest, I can't get myself caught up in that, or otherwise I'll never do anything. I'll be constantly stressed out. And the idea is not to be stressed, not to let every little thing that goes wrong every day, because things will go wrong. If you don't have a tough hide, you don't belong as an entrepreneur. Things are going to go wrong, and you have to realize it's just part of the process, and don't get caught up in the end result. For instance, like if you're a baseball player, right, and you say to yourself, oh God, it's 2 outs, bottom of 9th inning, World Series on the line. Please don't hit the ball to me because I don't want to be the fall guy. If you think like that, guess what? The ball is going to come to you. You are going to drop it, and you are going to be the fall guy. So you have to have an ironclad mindset. You can't be caught up in the result. You got to have confidence and say, I'm doing the best that I can.
Very good. Well, on that note, I want to ask you one last question. Is there anything that you'd like to add today to the listeners so that they know you a little bit better?
Well, I'd love people to follow me on social media, because that's where I post upcoming episodes. So you can follow me on Instagram, which is what I use most, at Eli Marcus Success. I'd like people to obviously look at my website, elimarcussuccess.com, and listen to my podcast on any of your podcast listening platforms. It's free. And I have to tell you something, when you can get a free education that can give you more than your $75,000 a year at Harvard, is going to teach you about success, or about how to eat right, or how to basically even reverse heart disease, which I talk about in one of my podcasts, how to give yourself the best chance against cancer or a lot of other diseases. That's a powerful education. And to invest a half an hour to do that while you're out jogging or biking or on the treadmill or whatever else you're doing, that's golden.
Yes, I agree. And we will definitely put links to all of your websites and podcasts and everything in the show notes for our people so that they can find you. And I want to thank you for being here today.
Bob, I enjoyed that water cooler chat. You're the best.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here with us today at the Water Cooler Hangout. If you'd like to learn more about the things we talked about, you can read the show notes by going to www.bobpoole.com/podcast. That's www.bobpoole.com/podcast with an S. Take care, and don't forget, listen first and sell later.